come on, get closer, and I'll be passing around some artifacts here. So the very first thing, this is going to be a condensed version of what I give to the schools. We go into 5th grade classes, and who were our colonists? Who were they when they came from the old world? Well, they were risk takers. They were explorers, and they were people that just needed to get away from persecution and religious freedom. Can you give me that map, the picture? So in 1763, after the French and Indian War, they were told that they could not cross the Appalachian Mountains. That was to be given to the British soldiers who fought during the French and Indian War. And so the colonists that lived in this dark green area were not allowed to go prospecting, hunting, settling, anything across that line. It was illegal. Now, what's the first thing that somebody who is an explorer and a risk taker does when they're said, nope, you can't do it? Off they go. So that was one of the contentions that they had. So in the life of that period of time, they came to own land. They came to earn their own income and keep it for themselves and not have to pass it on back to the mother country. But at the same time, throughout that entire period, the British colonists considered themselves to be British citizens. Now, how many people lived during that period of time from New England down through Georgia? 2.5 million. 2.5 million. Do you realize the number, what that represents? That's about the population of the Seattle area, spread out all across the eastern seaboard. So, which of the colonies do you believe had the largest population? Out of Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, or North Carolina? Which one had the largest population? No, you don't get to answer because you know that one.
Virginia.
Virginia. Well, you are absolutely correct. Virginia colony had 450,000 of the 2.5 million people. Okay, next question. Which city in the colonies had the largest population? Boston, New York, Philadelphia, or Charleston? Philadelphia? You must have heard this presentation before. Absolutely correct. Why is that? Because Philadelphia was the center and the capital of the colonies at the time, if you would. But it's very centralized to all the colonies. Okay, now, the average age of the colonists, what do you think that might have been? The average age of the colonists?
30.
30? You're pretty close. The average age of American colonists in the 1770s was 20 years old. So, how old was Alexander Hamilton? 21. How old was George Washington? Must have been an old man, huh?
35.
44. Nathan Hale. You know the story of Nathan Hale? How old was Nathan Hale, who sacrificed his life at being a spy? 21. How old was Betsy Ross? Herself and her apprentices had the job to make all the American flags once the flag raisers came along. She was 24, along with her young teen and younger apprentices who had to sew these flags by hand. Okay, Patrick Henry. How old was Patrick Henry? 40. Here's one for you. How old was King George? He was 38. So all these guys, we had, the American Revolution was a young person's war. And war was happening right here in America. So, what is life like in the 1770s, leading up to the war and during the war? Well, let me tell you. The standard family consisted of 6 to 8 children. Now, that's a lot of children, but think of that. That era, everything was manual. Everything had to be made by hand. Some of the examples that I have is I have to make a post hammer to hammer in my fences. Most of the population lived on farms outside of the cities. Single room homes, maybe with a loft for the children. All the children slept in the same bed. Believe me, the students at school don't like that statement. There's a lot more work to be done, a lot more danger, and here's a few other little tips. There were no cars. There are no airplanes. No computer games. No electricity. No Xboxes. They don't like those answers either. But most families lived on farms. Another one of the tools that they had to make by hand, making the saw to cut the logs. Well, they chopped wood. But everything that they had was made out of wood, plants, or animals. One of the things that I saw at the Northwest Colonial Festival, this is called tow. This comes from flax. We were not allowed to manufacture our own materials. We had to send our wool, our cotton, our timber, all raw materials back to England. As a matter of fact, one of our national symbols is the pine tree. Because England was out of trees, we had to ship all of our white pine back to England. So all we had was flax to grow. So this is a typical activity that would have to happen on the farm, where you would plant the flax seeds, which are just really tiny seeds in this little area, and then wait 3 months for it to grow. After it grows, you rip it out of the ground by the roots and bundle it together, and now you're waiting for it to dry out. After it dries out, you have the seeds that are still up on the upper stems, and you take it through this thresher, a stack of nails in the board to rip all those seeds off. And you want to do it when it's dry, because that way you can break the husk of where the seeds are for your next planting. See how manual that is? Okay, now you have the straw. Now you take the flax and you take it up against the board and you beat it. And you end up, after you get done beating and getting rid of the straw, you end up with what is known as tow. After you get tow, this tow goes to a spinning wheel to make thread. And then finally you get to weave it. So hopefully you'll get a shirt by Christmas. A day in a colonial life. So you're going to wake up. Flint and steel. Where is it? Yeah. You're going to wake up, and hopefully there's still some coals in the fireplace. If there's not coal in the fireplace, you're going to have to either walk to your neighbor, if you can find your neighbor, to get a coal to add to your fire, because your fire has to be for your cooking and your cleaning and everything else, or you better be good at flint and steel. Now, question, which is causing the spark, the flint or the steel? Anyone? It's actually the steel. The steel is softer material than the flint. Okay, so you finally get your you get your fire going. It's time for breakfast, and you get mush. You get corn mush. You get oatmeal mush. That's your food for the day. I have 2 bags and a yolk. That for the children, they would have to go down to a stream to get the water for the day. That water, carrying it back from the stream, may weigh up to 40 to 80 pounds, and it's wobbly. That's the water for the day, for cleaning, for drinking, and washing up. Okay, but for breakfast, what kind of materials did they have for eating and drinking? Well, bone plates made out of cow horn or antlers or whatever. You might have tin plates. And this becomes important too. When the tin plate wears out, what's the next thing it's going to be used for? They'll attach a handle to it, and now you have a hoe or a shovel. They did not throw things away. You're really good with wood? Wooden plates. Now, I love this as a unique item. Where'd it go? There you are. This bowl. How many of you go out for picnics and after you have your picnic, you wrap up everything and you throw it in the garbage can? You didn't do that back in the colonial times. This is a gourd bowl. Along with a gourd bowl, I also have a gourd canteen. It takes 3 years to dry out the gourds in order for them to be usable. Okay. You also might have somebody who might be a blacksmith and is able to make utensils, holding your meat in place so you can cut it with your knife. Your cooking pot. So, during the colonial times, how many here are first-born children? You were lucky. How many places of plates and silverware were in a typical colonial home? 4. Dad got his, mom got his, the oldest child had their own, and then the rest of the children. Part of that was also when mom made bread, she would put the dough in something like this and put this on the windowsill and have the bread rise, the dough rise, and then put it back in the fireplace and have the bread cook. While the bread's cooking, she's also making the stew. So when dinner comes along, we are going to have stew poured into this trough, bread on the side here. And don't forget that sometime during the day or previously, she's been out there beating this churn to get butter for the bread. So the stew is in here, and this gets passed around. Guess what? Dad gets whatever he wants and gets his fill. Then mother gets her fill. then the oldest child. If there's anything left, it is passed around in order of age to the children. During the colonial times, there were many, many malnourished young children and deaths because of that practice. The instrument by itself had to be clean all the time. Otherwise, you get trench mouth. That's where that disease came from. Okay. During colonial time also, well, yeah. There's dating that happened during colonial times too. This right here is an important instrument for Dad. This is called a courting candle. When the wick gets down here and goes out, the date's over. If you really don't like the guy, you put it in a short candle. Everything had to be made. Candles had to be made. This is a mold for candles. How many candles do you think the colonial times required? It was the only light. And don't forget the winter months. 300 to 400 candles had to be made, and the women were making these and doing the weaving and so forth during the fall while the men are harvesting, preparing the game and such. They're having to make candles. Now, beeswax candles were the most favorite because of the smell, but not all candles were made that way. Animal fat. Stinky business. Not everything was all hard work. It was all games. Throwing the ball around. Now, one other thing I have here is many of the things that they had in colonial time were multi-purpose. This right here is a sugar cone maker. They used to make sugar into cones, so that would be preserved, it would be compacted, and then they would scrape off of the cone the sugar that they wanted in their tea. Where do I have my sugar? Yeah, this is an example of a sugar cone. And you see it's still sealed, but you take these little canisters out of here, and guess what it's turned into now? Another form of candle making. So we had a war right here in our own country going on. Some of the weapons that we had, this is the normal one that the war basically started off with. This is the kind of weapon that the British would have had. This is known as the Brown Bess. It's a heavy, thick rifle, musket. It is smoothbore. So you see the Revolutionary War soldiers lining up, shoulder to shoulder, firing. I don't know how many went deaf because of that, but they were firing shoulder to shoulder just so they could hit something on the other side of the field. You know why? Don't see the fire until the white of their eyes, the cry at Bunker Hill, because that's about 50 yards. That's about as far as this thing will shoot. Eventually, we came and had a rifle. This is known as the Kentucky or Pennsylvania long rifle. The difference is that inside here is rifling. And so you could actually aim and actually hit a target. This was used by our sharpshooters, and when the British saw those who were in hunting frocks, who knew how to hit squirrels, and seeing these, we were picking off officers, and when the officers were gone, the troops of the British were in complete disarray. They didn't know what to do. But you see, during the American Revolution, you think it's like our armed forces today? Absolutely not. We did not have a standing army. We were using people, grabbing them from the farms. We had a threat coming up. We were calling them up. We call them the Minutemen, the militia. Other things is we were absolutely ill-equipped. We actually were trading our firearms between militia groups because we didn't have enough firearms. Our powder, when George Washington went back to the Continental troops, he didn't have enough. Fortunately, we heard of some down in the Bahamas, and we captured those by flying the Gadsden flag. The Gadsden flag's a yellow flag. It was on a ship. When that flag came along, the British ships went like that. Go on through. We landed at port, grabbed the munitions, and got it back to General Washington without a fire being shot, because yellow stands for quarantine, smallpox. They wanted nothing to do with it. So, now some of the other things that they do is they had to make powder horns. Got to keep that powder dry. You either made it out of wood, or you could make it out of cow horn. But it was a family war. When Dad went off to war, the whole family went. The wives were needed for cooking and sewing and nursing. The children, they had to be helping chopping the wood, running errands and stuff like that. One of the practices that they had was that they would be making the musket balls. Dad's out there in the field with about 24 of these. Somebody had better be back in camp making more. So this is the method. They would heat up lead or pewter. As a matter of fact, one of my ancestors, matter of fact, it was Henry Ford's wife. She did not like the British because she had to melt off her pewter to kill them. So they would put it into a mold like this, pour the hot solution into this mold. It cooled rapidly. You open it up, and then you snip them, and then measure them, and you have the lead. So those are some of the things that they did. Now, the young children, it wasn't all terrible. They made corn husk dolls, and some of them got pretty intricate. I mean, they have a little hoop skirt and hoop. But so, besides that, I have one more thing to share with you today, and that how many have watched pirate movies and heard about the pieces of 8? Have you ever thought why we had the dollar? British pounds were not very readily available in the colonies, but the Spanish dollar was. So we got the Spanish dollar, and this is a representation of a Spanish dollar. Now you go to the grocery store and you purchase something that's going to be a $50. You give him this coin, and somehow you get this back. The storekeeper took a hatchet and chopped it in half. Eventually, you are going to end up that's a piece of 8. When the storekeeper got enough of these, he would take it into the back of his shop, melt these back down, and repress it into $1. Now, I'm not going to tell you how often that they might have embezzled a couple of pinches over here and make it a little bit lighter, but that was their method. They'd re-stamp them. Thank you for allowing me to present some of the artifacts and the history of the colonial life.